Welcome to Ku English channel.
Alan Turing, the mind behind the machine age. Chapter 1. A Curious Child. Alan Matheson Turing was born on June 23, 1912, in Maida Vale, London, England. His parents, Julius Matheson Turing and Ethel Sarah Stoney, were part of the British upper middle class. Julius worked in the Indian civil service, which meant the family often had to make difficult decisions about where to live. Alan spent his early years moving between India and England, depending on where his father was working. From the very beginning, Alan stood out. He was not like other children. While most boys his age were interested in playing sports or chasing each other outside, Alan preferred to be alone with his thoughts. He asked unusual questions, and sometimes adults found it hard to answer him. His parents realized he was a highly intelligent and sensitive child. He had a curious mind and an endless desire to understand how things worked. As a young boy, Alan loved numbers. He could do math problems in his head quickly and accurately. He also enjoyed reading, especially science books. His favorite book as a child was Natural Wonders Every Child Should Know, which explained the wonders of nature using simple language. He read it again and again, always fascinated by the way the natural world worked. Alan's education began at St. Michael's, a small preparatory school, where the headmistress noted early on that he was a bright and gifted student. He was always ahead of his classmates in math and science. But while he was clearly talented, he didn't always follow rules. Alan had a strong sense of independence, and he didn't like to be told how to learn. He often ignored instructions and found his own way to solve problems. His teachers sometimes considered this a weakness, but it was actually a sign of his creative thinking. At the age of 13, Alan was sent to Sherborne School, a prestigious boarding school in Dorset. The school placed a strong emphasis on classical education, such as Latin, Greek, and history. Alan, however, was more interested in science and mathematics. This difference caused some tension between him and the school authorities. One of his teachers even wrote that Alan would never be successful unless he learned to focus on subjects other than mathematics. Despite these challenges, Alan continued to excel in his favorite subjects. He taught himself advanced concepts in math, often reading books far beyond his school level. One of the most important moments in his early life happened when he read Albert Einstein's papers. Though he was only a teenager, Alan was able to understand the complex ideas Einstein had written about. This moment showed how far ahead he was compared to other students of his age. During his time at Sherborne, Alan also formed a close friendship with another student named Christopher Morcom. Christopher was smart, kind, and shared Alan's love of science and learning. The two boys spent long hours talking about the universe, the laws of nature, and their dreams for the future. Christopher became Alan's first true friend, and possibly his first romantic attachment, though Alan never spoke openly about his feelings. Tragically, Christopher died suddenly of tuberculosis in 1930, when Alan was only 17 years old. The news devastated Alan. He felt as if a part of him had been taken away. For months, he struggled with sadness and confusion. But instead of giving in to despair, Alan turned his grief into motivation. He wanted to honor Christopher's memory by working harder than ever. He began thinking about deep questions, not just in math, but also in philosophy and the nature of the human mind. Could the soul live on after death? Could thought itself be reduced to numbers and logic? These questions would stay with Alan for the rest of his life. By the time he finished his schooling at Sherborne, Alan had made a name for himself as a young man with extraordinary abilities. He had a unique way of thinking and an unshakable belief in reason. Though some teachers thought he was odd or stubborn, others saw the spark of genius in him. When it came time to choose a university, there was no doubt Alan would study mathematics. He applied to King's College at the University of Cambridge and was accepted in 1931. At Cambridge, he would finally find a place where his talents were recognized and appreciated. There, his journey as one of the greatest minds of the 20th century would truly begin. Chapter 2. Discovering a Passion for Mathematics. When Alan Turing arrived at King's College, University of Cambridge in 1931, he felt like he had entered a new world. At last, he was in a place where thinking differently was not only accepted, it was celebrated. King's College was known for its academic excellence, especially in mathematics and philosophy. Alan quickly felt at home. He began his undergraduate studies with focus and intensity. He didn't care much about social events or making lots of friends. What mattered to him was the beauty of numbers, logic, and solving puzzles. He worked at all hours reading, writing, and thinking through difficult problems. His tutors noticed his unusual brilliance. One said that Alan was a student who never asked for help and never needed it. In his second year at Cambridge, Alan became interested in a field called mathematical logic. He read works by Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead, who had written Principia Mathematica, a complex attempt to put all of mathematics on a firm logical base. Alan also studied the new ideas of Kurt Gödel, a young Austrian logician who had recently shaken the world of mathematics with his incompleteness theorems. Gödel showed that some mathematical truths cannot be proven using logic alone. Alan was fascinated. If some truths couldn't be proven, what did that say about the power of the human mind? Could a machine, following rules, discover those truths? Or was there something special about human thinking? These deep questions pushed Alan to think about machines in a new way, not just as tools, but as devices that might imitate the process of human thought. He began to develop the idea of a machine that could perform mathematical calculations using basic instructions. In 1934, Alan graduated with first-class honors in mathematics. The next year, he was elected a Fellow of King's College, a high honor given to students who show great promise in research. He was only 22 years old. This gave him the freedom to explore his ideas more deeply. In 1936, at the age of 24, Alan wrote a paper that would change the world on computable numbers with an application to the incidence problem. It was not an easy read. The title referred to a famous problem in mathematical logic. Could there be a method to decide whether any given mathematical statement was true or false? In his paper, Alan introduced the idea of a hypothetical machine that could follow a series of rules to solve problems. This machine could read symbols, write new symbols, and move back and forth along a tape. The tape represented memory. The machine itself was very simple, but its power came from the way it followed instructions. Alan called this an automatic machine, or a machine. Today, we call it a Turing machine. His central idea was this: anything that can be calculated by a human following a set of rules can also be calculated by a Turing machine. This idea became known as the Church-Turing thesis, after the American mathematician Alonzo Church, who had come to a similar conclusion using different methods. Alan's paper showed that the incidence problem had no general solution. There could be no machine that could solve all mathematical problems. This was a huge result in the world of logic. It meant that some problems were beyond the reach of any mechanical process. Though most people outside the academic world didn't notice the paper at the time, it quietly became one of the most important documents in the history of computer science. Alan Turing had invented the idea of a computer before any real computers even existed. Chapter 3. The Turing Machine. The Turing machine, as described in Alan's 1936 paper, was a simple yet revolutionary idea. It was not a physical machine like a typewriter or radio. Instead, it was a theoretical model, a tool for thinking about what machines could do. The machine had a tape divided into small squares. Each square could hold a symbol, like a 1, 0, or a blank space. The machine had a head that could read a symbol, write a new symbol, and move left or right along the tape. The machine followed a list of rules, its program telling it what to do in different situations. Alan showed that such a machine could simulate any logical process, step by step. It didn't matter what the problem was, math, language, logic, as long as it could be broken down into small instructions. The Turing machine could, in theory, solve it. At the time, there were no physical computers. People who needed to do calculations relied on human computers, individuals, often women, who performed math by hand. Alan's idea was a giant leap. A machine could replace this work and do it more quickly and reliably. Though the machine in his paper was not real, Alan's ideas had practical meaning. He showed that there were limits to what machines could do. For example, some problems were undecidable. That is, no machine or person could ever solve them completely. This was a shocking conclusion. It meant that the dream of reducing all human knowledge to a set of rules was impossible. But Alan didn't see this as failure. Instead, it showed the importance of the human mind, the spark of creativity, the leap of insight that machines could not replicate. Alan's work was not just about numbers, it was about understanding the nature of thought itself. Could the brain be compared to a machine? Were our thoughts simply the result of signals and patterns, like the instructions on a tape? These questions opened the door to fields that didn't even exist yet: artificial intelligence, cognitive science, and computer programming. Despite its importance, Alan's paper was not widely understood outside mathematical circles. It was highly technical and filled with logical symbols, but those who did understand it saw its power. In particular, Alonzo Church and John von Neumann, two other giants in early computer theory, recognized Alan's contribution. In the following years, Alan continued to explore the boundary between logic and machines. He spent a year at Princeton University in the United States, working under Alonzo Church. There, he earned a PhD in mathematical logic in 1938, while in America, he studied cryptography, the art of making and breaking codes. This would prove crucial in the next chapter of his life. As Alan returned to Britain in 1939, war clouds were growing darker. Europe was on the edge of conflict, and the British government was looking for people with special talents. People who could think outside the box. People who could crack the enemy's secrets. Alan Turing was about to become one of the most important people in the war effort. Not with guns or tanks, but with his mind. Chapter 4: Breaking the Code. In September 1939, World War II began. Germany invaded Poland, and Britain declared war. The British government quickly realized that code breaking would be vital in the fight against Nazi Germany. The German military used a machine called the Enigma, which could create millions of different coded messages. These messages were sent between army units, ships, and planes. Breaking these codes could give the Allies a huge advantage. The British set up a secret code-breaking center at Bletchley Park, a large house in the countryside north of London. There, some of the best minds in Britain gathered to try to break Enigma. Mathematicians, chess champions, crossword experts, and linguists all came together for a common goal: to read the enemy's secret messages. Alan Turing joined Bletchley Park in 1939. He was placed in Hut 8, the section that worked on German naval codes. The Enigma machine was incredibly complex. Each message had a different key, and the Germans changed the settings every day. The machine used rotors to scramble letters, and each key press changed the machine's settings further. It seemed impossible to crack. But Alan believed it could be done. He studied how Enigma worked and saw patterns in the messages. He began working on a machine that could help. This machine would automatically test thousands of possible settings to find the right one. He called it the bomb. The bomb was an electromechanical device with many spinning drums and wires. It looked like a giant, noisy cabinet, but behind its simple appearance was genius. The bomb could search for the correct settings much faster than any human could. With it, Alan and his team were able to find the daily settings for Enigma. Once they broke a message, they had to keep it secret. If the Germans found out their code was broken, they would change it. So Bletchley Park had to be extremely careful. They used the information to guide British ships away from danger and toward German submarines. Without making it obvious, they had broken the code. Alan's work, along with that of his team, is believed to have shortened the war by at least 2 years. Some historians say it saved millions of lives. Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, called the work at Bletchley Park the geese that laid the golden eggs and never cackled. Even among the brilliant minds at Bletchley, Alan stood out. He was known for his sharp mind, but also his unusual behavior. He rode his bicycle with a gas mask, not for safety, but to avoid allergies. He chained his tea mug to the radiator so no one would take it. People found him odd, but also deeply kind and loyal. In 1941, Alan fell in love with a fellow Bletchley worker named Joan Clark. She was a brilliant mathematician too. They even got engaged, but Alan later told her he was gay. Joan appreciated his honesty, and though they broke off the engagement, they remained lifelong friends. By the end of the war, Alan had played a key role in one of the greatest intelligence operations in history, but he couldn't talk about it. Everything he did was top secret. For many years after the war, the world had no idea what he had done. His name was not in the papers. He didn't receive any awards. Alan went back to academic life quietly, turning his attention to something new, machines that could think. Chapter 5. Building the first computers. After the war ended in 1945, Alan Turing was eager to return to his academic interests. Though the work at Bletchley Park had been highly secret, it had sparked a new vision in Alan's mind. He was now thinking not only about logic and machines, but also about real physical computers. The time had come to build what he had once only imagined. Alan accepted a position at the National Physical Laboratory (NPL) in London. There, he began working on a project called the Automatic Computing Engine, ACE. The ACE was one of the first designs for a true digital computer. It would be capable of doing complex calculations at lightning speed using stored programs. This was a key step beyond mechanical calculators or even the wartime bombs. Alan wrote a detailed report explaining the design of the ACE. In it, he described how a machine could store a program in its memory just like it stored numbers. This idea of a stored program computer became the foundation of all modern computing. Today's laptops, phones, and even smartwatches follow the same basic concept that Alan described in 1945. However, building the ACE was not easy. The technology was still new, and many people didn't understand what Alan was trying to achieve. Worse, the leaders at NPL were slow to approve his work. Bureaucracy got in the way. Alan became frustrated. He had grand ideas, but little support. Meanwhile, in the United States, other scientists were building early computers too, like ENIAC and EDVAC. These machines got more attention, and Britain began to fall behind. Alan was deeply disappointed. Though he had the vision, he was not given the resources to bring it fully to life. In 1948, after several years of delay, Alan left the NPL and returned to academic life. He took a position at the University of Manchester, where he worked on another early computer, the Manchester Mark I. This machine was one of the first computers to run a program stored in memory. Alan helped write the software for it, solving practical problems with a machine that still took up an entire room. At Manchester, Alan continued to explore the limits of what machines could do. He wasn't just building computers. He was trying to understand thinking itself. Could a machine have a mind? Could it learn? Could it make decisions? These were radical questions. In 1950, Alan published a famous paper titled Computing Machinery and Intelligence. In it, he asked the question, can machines think? To explore this, he proposed a game called the imitation game, now known as the Turing test. In this game, a human would communicate with both another human and a machine through written messages. If the human couldn't tell which was which, then the machine could be said to think. The idea was simple, but powerful. Alan believed that thinking did not depend on being made of flesh and blood. If a machine could use language, reason, and learn, then it could be considered intelligent. This paper laid the foundation for the field of artificial intelligence, AI. Decades later, researchers would return to Alan's ideas as they built smarter and smarter machines. Alan Turing was not only a pioneer in math and war, he was now shaping the future of how we understand intelligence itself. Chapter 6. The Turing Test and Artificial Intelligence. In his 1950 paper Computing Machinery and Intelligence, Alan introduced ideas that were far ahead of his time. He knew that the word think had deep meaning for people. Most believed that only humans, or perhaps animals, could think. Machines, they said, were just tools. Alan disagreed. He believed that the mind could be explained in terms of processes, not magic. He wrote, "Instead of trying to produce a program to simulate the adult mind, why not rather try to produce one which simulates the child's?" This was a remarkable idea. Alan suggested that machines might learn just as children do. He saw learning as a process of training. A machine could be given data, rules, and examples, and it could improve over time. This is what we now call machine learning, a major field in today's computer science. To test a machine's intelligence, Alan proposed the imitation game. He described it like this. A person would sit at a computer and send typed questions to two other players, one a machine, the other a human. The person would not know which was which. If, after a series of questions, the person could not reliably tell which was the machine, then the machine had passed the test. The Turing test didn't try to define what thinking was in a strict way. Instead, it focused on behavior. If a machine could act like a human in conversation, then it deserved to be called intelligent. Alan's paper also answered many objections. Some people said machines couldn't have emotions, creativity, or consciousness. Alan replied with humor and logic. He didn't claim machines had souls, but he also said we didn't fully understand human minds either. He believed that, just as the brain was made of cells, a machine could be made of wires and switches. What mattered was not the material, but the process. Still, not everyone agreed. Many dismissed Alan's ideas as science fiction. After all, computers at the time were huge, slow, and could barely do simple math. The idea that they could one day talk like people seemed ridiculous. But Alan believed it was just a matter of time. He even predicted that by the year 2000, computers would be able to fool people 30% of the time in a 5-minute conversation. While this specific prediction hasn't fully come true, chatbots and AI assistants today, like Siri, Alexa, and ChatGPT, are getting closer every year. Alan also thought about ethics. If a machine could think, should it have rights? Could it make decisions on its own? These questions are more important now than ever before as AI becomes part of our daily lives. In his time, Alan Turing was alone in these thoughts. There were no departments of AI. There were no research centers studying machine learning, but he saw the future clearly. He opened the door to a new field, and though he would not live to see it grow, his name would always be remembered as its founder. Chapter 7. Personal Struggles and Secrets. While Alan Turing's professional life was filled with breakthroughs, his personal life was much more difficult. One of the biggest reasons for this was the way society at the time treated homosexuality. In 1950s Britain, being gay was not only frowned upon, it was illegal. Men could be arrested and sent to prison simply for having a relationship with another man. The law saw it as a crime, and there was little public sympathy. Alan had never hidden who he was from those close to him. Friends and colleagues at Cambridge and Bletchley Park knew he was gay, and most accepted it. He didn't try to live in secret. He believed in being honest, even if it cost him. In 1952, Alan met a young man named Arnold Murray. The two developed a brief relationship, but not long after, Alan's home was broken into. When he reported the incident to the police, he mentioned Arnold. The police began asking questions. Soon, Alan was arrested under a law that made gross indecency between men a criminal offense. The court found him guilty. He was given two choices: go to prison or undergo a form of treatment called chemical castration. This involved taking drugs that would reduce his libido and cause other physical changes. It was a cruel and humiliating punishment. Alan chose the second option, hoping to avoid jail and continue his work. But the side effects of the drugs were serious. He gained weight, felt tired, and became deeply depressed. Even worse, his security clearance was removed. He could no longer work with the government or in sensitive scientific roles. A man who had once helped win the war was now seen as a risk. Despite this, Alan tried to keep going. he returned to his research in Manchester, focusing on new problems in biology and mathematics. He explored how patterns formed in nature, like the spots on leopards or the spirals in seashells. His work on morphogenesis, though less well known, was groundbreaking in its own way. But the stress of his punishment, the isolation he felt, and the public shame weighed heavily on him. Britain, at the time, offered no support or understanding to people like Alan. He was mocked, watched by the police, and treated as a criminal, not a hero. In 1954, Alan was found dead in his home. He had eaten part of an apple poisoned with cyanide. Though there are still questions about the exact cause of death, most believe it was suicide. He was only 41 years old. His death was a tragedy, not only because of his personal pain, but because the world lost one of its greatest minds far too early. His ideas could have continued to change the world, but society's cruelty and ignorance cut his life short. For many years, Alan Turing's name was forgotten. The secrets of Bletchley Park remained hidden. His contribution to the war effort, to computer science, and to the future of AI were ignored. Only decades later would the truth finally come to light. Chapter 8: Legacy in Computer Science. After Alan Turing's death in 1954, much of his work remained unknown to the public because his wartime codebreaking at Bletchley Park was top secret. His name did not appear in the history books as it should have. His brilliant theories about computing were also ahead of their time and not fully understood. But over the years, Turing's influence quietly grew, and his ideas slowly shaped the future of science and technology. In the 1960s and 70s, as computer science developed into its own academic field, researchers began to recognize the deep importance of Alan's work. His 1936 paper introducing the Turing machine became required reading for students of theoretical computer science. Professors taught his ideas to explain how computers could work in theory, regardless of what they were made of. The Turing machine was simple, but powerful. It showed how any task that could be described step by step could, in theory, be done by a machine. This idea became the foundation for what we now call computability theory, the study of what problems can and cannot be solved by computers. In fact, the concept of a universal Turing machine is now seen as the earliest model of a general-purpose computer. It's the ancestor of every modern device we use, from phones to laptops to supercomputers. Turing's work also shaped programming. His ideas helped computer scientists understand how instructions could be written, stored, and executed. Every programming language today, whether Python, Java, or C++, owes something to his early thinking. Even his unfinished projects, like the automatic computing engine, ACE, inspired other computer builders. Though the ACE was delayed, its design showed how a fast, memory-based machine could work. Other teams used his ideas to build the first real computers in Britain, such as the EDSAC and the Manchester Mark I. Today, we honor Alan Turing as one of the founders of computer science. Without him, the digital age might have arrived much later. His vision, expressed in simple papers and logical arguments, created a new world, one in which machines help humans think, work, and explore. Yet, for decades, Turing's name remained in the background. Most people had no idea that the phones in their pockets, the calculators in their desks, or the internet they used every day were all connected to the genius of a quiet man who once asked, "Can machines think?" In time, the world would remember and honor him properly. Chapter 9: Recognition and Apology. For many years after his death, Alan Turing remained a hidden figure. The secrets of Bletchley Park were not revealed until the 1970s. And even then, it took time for the public to understand what he had done during World War II. When the truth came out, historians were stunned. They learned that Turing had helped shorten the war by 2 years and saved millions of lives. His work on the Enigma code was one of the greatest contributions to the Allied victory. People began to ask, why was this man punished instead of praised? The injustice of Turing's treatment became a subject of national debate. Over time, pressure grew for the British government to take responsibility for how he had been treated. Campaigns were launched. Scientists, historians, and activists demanded an official apology. In 2009, more than 50 years after Turing's death, British Prime Minister Gordon Brown gave a formal apology. He said, "On behalf of the British government and all those who live freely, thanks to Alan's work, I am very proud to say, we're sorry. You deserved so much better." It was a powerful moment, but many believed that words were not enough. They wanted a legal change. In 2013, after public pressure and a long campaign, Queen Elizabeth II granted Turing a royal pardon, clearing his criminal record. But Turing was not the only one. Thousands of men had been punished under the same unjust laws. In 2017, the British government passed the Alan Turing Law, a policy that gave posthumous pardons to tens of thousands of people who had been convicted of homosexuality. It was a historic act of justice. Turing was also honoured in other ways. His face appeared on a British £50 banknote in 2021. The note featured not only his portrait, but also mathematical formulas and computer diagrams that reflected his work. The Turing Award, created by the Association for Computing Machinery, is often called the Nobel Prize of Computing. It honours outstanding contributions to the field he helped create. Statues of Turing now stand in Manchester, London, and Bletchley Park. One sculpture shows him sitting on a bench, holding an apple, the same fruit that symbolises both knowledge and, tragically, the method of his death. Alan Turing's life was short, and it ended in tragedy. But in the years that followed, the world began to see him clearly, not as a criminal, but as a hero, a pioneer, a man whose mind changed the world, and whose story reminds us how important it is to treat people with dignity, respect, and fairness. Chapter 10. A Timeless Legacy. Alan Turing's story is one of brilliance, courage, and tragic injustice. But most of all, it is a story of vision. He saw a world that didn't yet exist and helped build it. Today, Turing's influence touches nearly every part of modern life. His ideas are in the devices we use, the code we write, and the questions we ask about intelligence and humanity. The Turing machine continues to be a symbol of theoretical power. It reminds us that with just a few simple rules, we can explore the limits of logic, mathematics, and computing. It teaches students that even the most complex problems can be broken into steps, and that machines can follow those steps if they are designed well. The Turing test, though debated, still shapes how we think about artificial intelligence. Every time we talk to a chatbot or interact with a smart assistant, we're testing how human-like machines can become. AI researchers still ask, how close are we to passing the Turing test? Turing's work also raises deep philosophical questions. What does it mean to think? Can a machine have emotions? If an AI learns and grows, is it alive in some way? These are the questions that modern scientists, ethicists, and engineers continue to explore. In recent years, as AI becomes more powerful, people have looked again at Turing's early ideas. He predicted many of the challenges we now face, such as whether machines can make moral decisions, or how to train them to avoid bias. In this way, Turing's vision remains a guiding light in an age of rapid technological change. But perhaps Turing's greatest legacy lies not only in machines, but in humanity. He was a man who thought differently, who lived honestly, even when it cost him dearly, who chose truth, logic, and integrity over comfort. He was a man punished for who he was, yet who gave the world tools to become better, faster, and more connected. His life teaches us that greatness often comes from outsiders, that the future belongs to those who imagine new possibilities, and that society must learn from its mistakes so that we never again lose someone like Alan Turing. Today, his story is told in books, films, and classrooms. Students learn not just about his work, but about his courage. Coders around the world look to him as the father of their field, and people of all backgrounds draw inspiration from his strength and honesty. Alan Turing never saw the computer age he helped create, but without him, it might never have come. His dream of intelligent machines, his belief in the power of logic, and his quiet resistance to injustice all live on. He was a mathematician, a codebreaker, a thinker, and a man who changed the world. And now, the world remembers.